Hi, it's Dwyer. It's December 10th, 2024. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. You know what? What I have to say today is just really something for young fans to think about as they think about their lives. They think about the careers ahead of them, how they're going to comport themselves, and they think about sports and politics. Now, when I was a kid, and I can tell you this unequivocally, right? I remember it. It was my childhood. I would be out with friends. We'd be playing sports. We'd be picking the best athletes in the game. We would pretend we were them, right? So there was always a Dr. J whenever we played basketball, right? Well, let me point out, it was clear, it was obvious to everyone in the room in the later 70s that one of the absolute best players, if not the best hitter in baseball, and I'm not talking about, outside of, let's say, the top three in all of baseball, was Jim Rice. Boston player. Keep in mind, I was a Yankee fan. It wasn't like I was going around calling myself Jim Rice, right? But I knew Jim Rice was a son of a gun. I understood this was the top shelf, right? It's just like in boxing. You think about great fighters, you automatically think of Terrence Crawford, Canelo, right? You have your own short list. We can debate who's the best in a way. We can debate it, but you understand the guys on the list. Jim Rice was on the list. Then, of course, I've lived long enough to have seen Jim Rice retire and then come up for Hall of Fame consideration. And folks, it was a shocker. Jim Rice was passed over for several years. Now, I knew Jim Rice wasn't loved by the press, right? I talk about whether or not an athlete is loved from time to time. But, if you're heavily into sports, you don't think that's really going to matter that much. You know who the Hall of Famers were. You understand, okay, this guy wasn't warm and cuddly with the press. You understood, for example, in football, that Bill Parcells, for all of his great coaching, had a complicated relationship with the press. But you didn't think people would gang up on him to try to keep him out of the Hall of Fame. Well, understand, in baseball, that sport's complicated, right? That's the one sport that actually outed guys who were using performance-enhancing drugs. You might recall the Mitchell Report. Other sports aren't that silly. Well, understand, Jim Rice barely made the Hall of Fame. He waited for several years. I'm sure his contemporaries were astonished. Well, now it's 2024. I can just tell you again, unequivocally, when I first started watching baseball in the early 70s, right? And this was, my dad was a Mets fan, so you can imagine the futility. This is before 73. You can imagine the futility of me watching Mets games growing up, right? I wouldn't have been able to have identified winning baseball watching Met games every night. Well, I'll just tell you, it was clear. The best hitter in baseball was Dick Allen. Right? You understood that Dick Allen had a complicated relationship with the press. You also understood that Dick Allen was one of the very best baseball players in the game. We were talking about power. We were talking about average. In other words, back then, Willie Mays was slowing down a little bit. Hank Aaron was a great older player. But in terms of guys who were a little bit younger than them, right? The generation after Hank Aaron, you knew that if you stopped the guy on the street and said best hitters in the game, you knew that Dick Allen was one of them, right? You knew it. Well, just understand, it's taken this long, and it's embarrassing, quite frankly, to baseball. It's taken this long for Dick Allen to make the Hall of Fame. Folks, it's preposterous, right? Let me name another guy. And it was obvious. You might remember the family, the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Bill Matlock, Willie Stargell, of course. The best player on that team was Dave Parker. Understand, Parker combined power with batting average. Parker is a former batting champion. You know, we talk about legendary outfield arms, right? Roberto Clemente is a little before my time. I vaguely remember him, but I couldn't tell the nuances of the game. But understand, when Dave Parker came along, you knew he had one of the absolute best arms in the game from the field, right? So you had not only a guy who was a batting champ, who hit with power, you had, you know, one of the forces of nature in the outfield. I believe it's the 79 All-Star game where Dave Parker, you know, gets a ball in the outfield and guns down a guy at home plate. Right, folks? The talent was ridiculous. You know, we talk about five-star athletes. Even guys like me with no scouting experience could have scouted Dave Parker. You see a guy like this playing in high school and you say, hey, let's sign that guy to a contract. Right? This would be like looking at Bo Jackson when he was in high school. Right? Dave Parker was an obvious Hall of Famer. Like Dick Allen, Dave Parker played for more than one team, and he was a star on more than one team. Right? Well, Dave Parker, and understand the 80s were, by 2024 standards, way out of control. Right? Baseball had a drug problem, and it wasn't a PED problem. One of the best teams I've ever seen, the 86 Mets. Just research them. Type in the word cocaine, and you're going to have multiple names pop up. And this was on the World Series winner. Well, Dave Parker got involved with the era, right? And Dave Parker was linked to a drug scandal. Now, understand, we're not talking about Osterin and all these designer drugs. You know, we're not talking about Victor Conti and the Cream and the Claire. No, the 80s, that was a libertine era. Right? Think MTV, think that era. People wearing costumes, Michael Jackson, Prince. Right back then, you had some people in the public light who had a problem with cocaine. Right? Well, let me just say this. That shouldn't have affected Dave Parker's Hall of Fame chances. Right? It's ridiculous. You know, understand, like the Mets, you started hearing that multiple people on the Pittsburgh Pirates, may have been recreational drug users. Well, folks, it's taken this long. But with Dick Allen, Dave Parker has finally made it into the Hall of Fame. I'm making this video to simply say to people too young to remember the players, right? People who might not understand the level of politics in baseball in terms of Hall of Fame selections. Dick Allen and Dave Parker, simply put, are two of the best ball players I've ever seen. Right now, baseball is busy excluding some other great players from the game, right? Including the B12 Cream and the Clear generation, right? You know, Bonds, Clemens, McGuire, Sammy Sosa, Juan Gonzalez, guys who, quite frankly, were among the very best ballers of their generation. right? So baseball is dealing with issues, right? Pete Rose, of course, was out of the Hall of Fame. He's died. I'm guessing there's going to be a move now to put Charlie Hustle in the Hall of Fame where he belongs. You'd be hard pressed to find a more consistent hitter, 4,256 hits in his career. So, in the swamp that is baseball's Hall of Fame selection criteria, I just want to thank the sport for finally putting in Dick Allen and Dave Parker. Right? Let me just say, folks, this is long overdue. Right? At least now I can go to bed at night knowing the world isn't crazy enough to keep these guys out of the Hall of Fame. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. I'm particularly interested in hearing from older people who remember Dick Allen, particularly when he was called Richie Allen, and who remember Dave Parker. Right, folks? These were great ballers. These guys should have been in the Hall more than a decade ago. Right? I applaud baseball for righting that wrong. Now we need to find a way, absent evidence that he threw games, to put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. Right? Also, let me just say this. You know, anyone who read Jim Bouton's Ball 4 knows about uppers in the game of baseball. Right, folks? Amphetamine use was widespread in the 1970s. Right? Now, if you have a sport where you have guys who are rumored to have used amphetamines, I'm not going to out any of them here, but it was so widespread that, you know, Hall of Famer Dave Winfield talked about it. Right? Talked about how he played clean and many people did not. Right, folks? I'm just telling you, many of these amphetamine users are in the Hall of Fame. And if you're going to have guys in the Hall of Fame who openly talk about how they threw spitballs, how they loaded up baseballs, how they put mud on baseballs, and how it helped their effectiveness. Again, I'm not going to out guys, just understand the guys have outed themselves. Right? I believe one of them wrote a book called Me and the Spitter. Right? If you understand that baseball's Hall of Fame already is less than pristine, that there were people there who were chemically enhanced or who employed tactics to increase their effectiveness. You know, one time they came out to the mound on a pitcher who ended up in the Hall of Fame as he should have been. And of course the guy had a nail file on him on the mound. He was scuffing up baseballs. It won't be until the baseball powers that be recognize that the Hall of Fame already has a lot of guys who cut corners that will be able to properly admit the past and will be able to allow a Pete Rose as well as others into the Hall of Fame. Right? I lived through the 1990s. You knew something was going on in the 1990s just looking at guys. On a franchise like the Baltimore Orioles, for example, that had Boog Powell and Frank Robinson, in other words, major power hitters, guys who look like power hitters. There was a stretch there where the team record holder for most home runs in a season belonged to a leadoff hitter. Right? Who, of course, suddenly looked like he was a weightlifter and started jacking the ball out of the park on a level that he had not done at any time in his career. Right? You were looking at numerous players in the 1990s, and they were barely recognizable. I remember looking at a game and I saw a second baseman. And I thought, wow, who's this new guy? Well, the new guy happened to be the old guy. Only the old guy, as the story went at the time, had just started lifting weights. Right? That was the claim. Right? There's a Hall of Famer who was one of the best football players I've ever seen in the NFL. And we are to believe that it wasn't until 1985 or 86 that this guy, who was picked in the top 5 of the NFL draft, just started lifting weights. Right? Of course, the guy after his career ended up having a drug problem. Now, we need to come to grips with that. We need to admit as a society what happened. Because if we don't, we're going to continue the fiction that has Clemens, Bonds, McGwire out of the Hall of Fame. Right? There's a cover-up going on in baseball where a lot of guys know that some of the guys in the Hall of Fame were juicers. But no one wants to talk about it because, of course, there is a code, right? We'll call it the baller code, where you don't talk about what's giving other guys an edge, right? Folks, it's ridiculous. Well, let me just point out, I don't believe Dick Allen was a juicer. I believe Dave Parker admitted to using cocaine recreationally in the early 80s, right? As some Mets did from the 86 team. Please, let's figure out the drugs, right? While cocaine, no doubt, is an upper, I doubt it helps your career as much as taking the cream and the clear, right? Let's just be clear. Let's also be able to separate out parts of a player's career, right? If you suspect that a guy started juicing 2/3 of the way into his career, and the first 2/3 are Hall of Fame level and cover a period of more than 10 years, let him into the Hall of Fame. Right? Even if you're one of these people who doesn't believe any of the statistics from the juicer era are valid. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me just say, as a child of the 70s, I'm overjoyed that finally Dick Allen and Dave Parker are in baseball's Hall of Fame. Thanks for stopping by.